Hi and welcome to another Tortoise Thinking. I'm David Taylor, one of the editors at Tortoise, and this is the latest in a series that we're calling How We Live Next. And the idea behind the session we're going to have tonight is to look at really the future of government. We're going to be asking, should the pandemic trigger the end of national government and the rise of regionalisation? And I've got a bunch of really excellent guests with us tonight, but hopefully we're not going to limit the conversation to those people who were joining us from various places like Liverpool and Manchester and Sheffield and the New Forest. We're going to hope to hear from you all on some of these questions. But just to get us started, I know you've probably been to a think-in before by now, but just to sort of whiz you back through it, the idea of this is that it's not another panel discussion where everyone sits passive and hopes to be entertained. Really what we're after is to try and replicate a news conference in a traditional newsroom where we take one of the big issues of the day and we work through it and try to get to a more nuanced and thoughtful set of opinions on it and hopefully guide our journalism. So it's pretty straightforward. We want to hear from you, and we have a very simple rule, which is no questions. We just want to hear your views. So with that in mind, we'll go into it and we'll just talk about some Zoom veteran tips as well. I'm sure most of you know them by now, but just so you know that you've all been automatically muted on this one when you join, but you're still going to chance to have your say. We're going to be using the chat function. My colleague Merapi is going to be running that, and more often than not, much of the good conversation goes on in that sidebar. So hopefully, if you say something brilliant in there, Merapi will give us a shout, and we'll get you into the discussion on the video as well. Just to confirm as well, we are recording tonight, so if you were going to be controversial, don't let us stop you. And then again, with you've probably done this many times already on various Zoom calls, but you'll see if you want to get involved, if you click on the participants button at the bottom, it takes you through to a bit where you can raise your hand and let people know that you want to say something. So it's often quite good just to check that we know that technology is working. So I thought I might ask you a question to kick us off, just to practice. So if you found that participants thing and you can see where your little hand is, why don't you just give me a little wave. So the question is, if you think that the pandemic has raised serious questions about government competence, just give me a wave. And I think that we're getting on for a full set there. So I think most people have tuned in, and it's quite possible that there is proof that we've gone past the benefit of the doubt moment of lockdown as we come out the other side. So you see what you need to do there. So we'll crack on. So how we live next. The inspiration for it, I should say, did come from central government. It was that moment when the Chancellor changed everything, suddenly turned the taps on and found a lot of money to prop up businesses and to prop up people's jobs. And it was a real clarifying moment where you felt, well, all of those old questions like, it's too difficult and it's too costly and we've always done it this way, were suddenly washed away. And it left us, and me in particular, thinking, well, if we can challenge those certainties, what else can we ask questions about? And so it feels to me that it's an opportunity for us, even though we're in this hazardous and painful time, it's a chance to say, what else do we want to do differently? And we've been going through almost all aspects of human activity in that respect, education and travel and so on. But tonight, it's really about who provides services for us and where do they come from? And is central government any longer really the the best mechanism for delivery. So I'm gonna get started with one of our guests, Vince Cable, if he's around and has got good Wi-Fi where he is. And Vince, if you're, have we got him? How are we doing?
I hope.
Yes, it sounds like we're doing well. So, Vince,
yes,
how are we doing? I'm wondering, Vince, can you just say hi?
Sorry,
and
I just disappeared.
There you go. All right. Well, let me have a go. I know your Wi-Fi's been a little bit
Hi.
wonky. So Vince, I'm sure people will recall, was business secretary and in the cabinet during the coalition government, and so I suppose if anyone has had their naive idealism knocked out of them by the realities of government, it's him. And I think you were there, were you not, Vince, when Labour's attempts at devolving power to the regions were abolished. I wonder if you could just give us that origin story to get started.
Well, in terms of origin, I mean, the Labour government did one big good thing, which was the devolution to Scotland, London and Wales, which I think has worked well, certainly in Scotland, to some extent in London. And so, to some extent, the city regional mayors, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, have worked well. Most of the others are anonymous. But in terms of your big theme, I'd love to see a rebirth of local government, of local decision making, but I don't see the potential of it in the present environment. I mean, what's happening is that national governments are actually acquiring much more power. I mean, control over movements, nationalism entering into trade. We're in an era of nationalism rather than of regionalism or localism. And though I'd love to see more devolution, I don't see it in the current environment.
And it seems possible that we're actually living through a moment where power is being even more centralized during COVID-19.
Yes, I think if you look around the world, it's a very mixed story. I mean, the big success in the Western Hemisphere has been Germany, which is a federal system, but they have a strong chancellor and a political consensus culture, which we don't have here. In the United States, you have another federal system, and you could argue that that's acted as a counterbalance to the disastrous influence of the White House. The governors in New York and California and elsewhere have given real leadership. And in both those two countries, maybe Australia, federalism has acted as a very good counterbalance to bad central government, certainly in the American case. I mean, India is an interesting example, a very federal country entering into a crisis phase. They haven't quite got there yet. But what's happening in India is that individual states are putting up border controls to stop people moving around. I mean,
so you start to see in this moment of crisis there's a patchwork of responses there, clearly, and Governor Cuomo, who has provided leadership, perhaps Newsom in California, and certainly some strong voices in the Northwest, I think, here in England, and a very different tone coming from Scotland and Wales, indeed.
Yes, I mean, the positive thing is that you get real initiative, creativity. I mean, I'm not a Scottish nationalist, but I do get a sense that the Scottish government does kind of breathe a Scottish spirit and does reflect opinion better than the government in London. And I'm places like, Steve in Liverpool, they've got a real personality. Probably Andy Burnham is one of the most quoted British politicians at the moment, and that's good. But on the other hand, you're getting a lot of parochialism. Cornwall effectively saying we don't have a national health service in Cornwall. We don't want anybody coming here. We just want to look at our own patch. So, there is a downside to this localism, that it can be very parochial, exclusive, and in many parts of England, there isn't really a voice. I mean,
Yes.
you could blame the coalition, you could blame past governments for that, but the kind of general mess around British local government reorganisation, the lack of regionalism, we've got a very complicated patchwork quilt of good strong city region governments in some areas and complete nothingness in many parts of England.
Yes, general mess feels like something you could put on a lectern, I think. Well, let's just go around the room a little bit. We've got Arianna Giovannini, who's an academic from De Montfort University, and you've got a tremendously long title, Arianna, so I'm going to spare people that. But
don't worry.
Can I call you an expert in local politics?
That's right.
Excellent. Well, look, would you mind just tell me, where are we now in? Let's think about England firstly, but perhaps you can just paint a picture for the UK generally. How much power is centred on Westminster, and this catchphrase that drove a lot of the argument during Brexit of take back control. Why does it have to end with a conversation in Westminster? Why can it not push further away and go to cities and regions?
Well, I think that we know that over-centralization is a long-standing issue, particularly in England, as you've underlined. And we've seen a lot of research recently, for example, from IPPR North, from the UK 2070 Commission, that has clearly emphasized that over-centralization is the root cause of the deep regional inequalities that we have in this country. Now the question is that with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemics, basically the challenge has been taken to a new level, I would say, both in terms of widening regional inequalities, but also really exposing the problematic nature of central-local relations in our country, but also exposing the failings of our broken centralized system of governance. I think one thing that has been very, very clear throughout the pandemic is that local authorities have been at the forefront of the response, and they've really shown incredible resilience and the crucial role that they play in people's lives. But we also have to keep in mind that local authorities are depleted by a decade of austerity, and now by the shocks to their budgets and to the local economies that have been brought in by the pandemic. So most of them at the moment are really on the brink of collapse. And this is something that in other contexts, if you look at international contexts, is something unthinkable in a way, because usually the local level has a degree of constitutional protection that we do not have in this country. So like the fact that at this point in time, we are left to ask, if local government fails, who is going to provide discretionary services? Who will support the local communities in their everyday lives and struggles? And what will happen to the vulnerable? We shouldn't really be left pondering this kind of questions. But I also wanted to make clear that this alleged failing of the local state is not at all of its own making, I don't think. And it is really our broken centralized system and the power hoarding nature of the Westminster model that is really the root cause of the meltdown that many councils are facing at the moment.
Power hoarding is quite a phrase,
It is.
and that. So you've already. I was, I'm a pathetic optimist, and I really thought there was a risk that we might have a wildly optimistic conversation tonight about an unimaginably great future. But you've already sort of depressed the hell out of me. So, but hopefully, the next time we come to you, Arianna, we'll make some progress on that. So I'm just going to bring in Steve Rotherham. Steve's the Metro Mayor of Liverpool, and I suppose in the sort of the kind of local government power sharing hokey cokey that we've seen in 2 decades, the balance swung slightly back towards the northwest. In I think 2017, when your position was created, and Steve, for those who don't know, it's not just Liverpool, is it? It covers about like 17 parliamentary constituencies, the patch you've got a purview over. Just give people a sense of the types of issues that you have got something to say about.
Well, probably the area that we have the most power and resource is around public transport, and public transport is absolutely huge. You saw what happened with Sadiq recently, and that's not something that is just confined to the capital. We might find other areas where they're having public transport issues that may also need some government support, but you know, that's not being forthcoming for us at the moment, although I've got a call with Baroness Via tomorrow, I think, so I better not preempt what might come out.
This is your moment to
yeah. She knows. If you spoke to her, she'll tell you, look, I'm fiercely patriotic towards the area that I represent. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a Scouser born and bred. If you didn't understand what I've just said, there's no subtitles. I know there's only at least one of the Scouser on the call, because I've just seen Nick Ord's name come up. Yeah. So there are one or two of us scattered around. But look, the reality is, and Vince touched on this, he talked about parochialism, and certainly that could be an issue, given that in the Northwest, for instance, you've got Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region. We've got 1.6 million people. They've got about 2.5 million people. You've got a big pocket that has devolution, but equally you've got huge areas, Lancashire, Cumbria and Cheshire, that don't have devolution. Now we want it for everyone. We live in the most politically centralised democracy in the OECD, and yet we have the most unbalanced economy in the whole of Europe. And I believe that those two things are intrinsically linked. That's not, you know, mutually exclusive issues. And so we need devolution, but everybody should get devolution. Just because we've got it, we're not saying we're happy, pull the drawbridge up.
Yes.
But people should be entitled to put forward their devolution plans.
Let's think about that as this conversation goes on. But I wondered, just to sort of give people a sense of what you've been dealing with in Liverpool, what's been happening with COVID-19? Because I think I'm right in saying you've been hit harder than most areas.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've had a huge spike in infections, and unfortunately higher than national and UK average death rates. And there's going to be a whole host of factors: social deprivation, underlying health causes, etc., etc. But one of them potentially might be that Liverpool played Atletico Madrid, and at that time Madrid was a coronavirus hotspot, and yet 3,000 fans were allowed to travel. And Professor Spector from one of the London universities has correlated a death rate in excess of 41, which is directly attributable to those fans coming over. Now, you know, there's loads of debate and argument to be had. Yeah. There'll be a time for this. There needs to be an independent inquiry. But you're right, that these, for instance, football games and matches being played is outside of the purview of a Metro Mayor or a City Mayor.
But so what about the whole COVID-19 moment has been revealed to you about the performance of central government and how remote or otherwise it feels from the concerns of people who live in your area?
I don't think governments are going to look back at this period with any romanticism or nostalgia that they've acquitted themselves fantastically well. You know, they can throw up as many smoke screens as they want, but the fundamental question that still needs to be answered is why does this country, more than probably anywhere else per capita in the world, have more deaths and more instances of infection? And if it's not number one, it's number two and number three. So it's really right up there. When we had so long to plan, and it's the preparation that I was always told that's really important. Build on strong foundations, and we didn't do that.
Yes. Edna, I'm going to come to you. Edna Robinson, who's chairman of the People's Powerhouse. You're just up the road from Steve in Manchester, aren't you? Just tell people a little bit about what you do, first of all.
Well, we're a platform that was developed around the Northern Powerhouse construct, where there was a sense there was a lack of diversity and public energy around the conversation about Northern construct. Mm-hmm. So we saw people in power, a small number of people, talking about what the North should look like and what its future might contain. And out of that, there was a groundswell of opinion that we needed to have a conversation that broadened both the concept and the actual in terms of who should be in the room, what it should look like, what the priorities might be. And so 3+ years ago, we created this platform where we amplify people's voices who want to talk about devolution, want to talk about the future of the North. We're not an organisation, we are a platform, but we have some people with very strong views about the beauty and the potential of the North, which needs to be talked about as much as the challenges that the North faces.
So really, I suppose if people were concerned that government power might come closer to them, but they'd be shut out of it, you're the organisation that's trying to make sure that there's a diverse range of opinions in the room, not unlike this, I suppose. Just give me something to chew on before we move the conversation to the wider group. What do you want to see?
What I want to see is a continued serious, I think the intellectual case for devolution is made. You've heard from all the other speakers, the evidence is there, the evidence around regionalism and productivity, around regionalism and public health, life expectancy, happiness. There's a whole range of measures that show in other countries that really strong regional identity and regional delivery leads to a better quality of life. Mm-hmm. So we want to see the continuation of that conversation, but I'll go back to Vince's introduction and the over-centralisation of the management of this peril that our nation has been suffering is quite frightening in terms of the sense of who's in the room, who is in the room to influence the strategy. And taking Steve's point about the football, there wasn't a public health voice in that room in those early days, because when you have centralisation and you have a small number of experts, you get that opinion and only that opinion. And we're arguing that there is a need when you have a huge issue to have a lot of ideas and a lot of people surrounding it. So I think we have got a government that's becoming overly centralised and unaccountable. And so the issue is as much about accountability as it is about centralisation.
All right, well, that's a great springboard into the wider group. Now, Meripi, I think you were flagging Tabitha, who was had some things to say in the chat a moment ago. Tabitha Morton, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Tabitha. You've been a bit of a stalwart of thinking's past, even in those long misty days.
When we could actually be in the same room as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, it was nice. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm a Scouser. It's nice to see Steve. So
you've worn your Everton colours for the.
I have as well. I've got to remind Steve, his competitors here.
Yeah.
So I've got a bit of an interest in this. I ran against Steve for the devolved mayor and was picked to the post by Steve.
You know what? Sorry to interrupt you, but he was, just before we came on, he was saying, so it's a bit like a fight in a pub then. So I assured him that it was civilised disagreement, but let's see where this goes.
No, do you know what? I've got a huge thanks for Steve, because I ran on a platform to end violence against women and girls, and Steve listened to what I said and took that on. So huge thank you to that. He made it a priority. But Steve also knows my feelings, and this is not a Liverpool thing, this is across the whole country. Both our national government and our local government has the same people in charge. Normally white, normally men, normally of a certain age. You know, Liverpool, for example, has one of the oldest Chinese communities and the oldest Caribbean African communities. And we just don't see that representation coming through. And I think that leads us on to a lack of imagination across the entire country about how we make policy.
Yeah.
You know, we constantly invest in infrastructure and big projects like that, rather than thinking about, you know, childcare. If you invest pound for pound in the caring community, for example, it returns twice as much to the economy as investing in infrastructure. So that was, you know, I know we can't ask questions here, but the imagination I want to see is, how do we change the route into politics, so people who actually look like they come from a city are in charge, and it's not all pale and it's not all male. And I think as the national, internationally, we see when, you know, the structural racism that happens across the globe, it just keeps our communities repressed. So yeah, I want to challenge everyone on the call to use our imagination in our politics, because otherwise...
Yes. And I really strongly feel that that's the moment. And I do understand that there are going to be people who say, look, the only priority for us is to get the economy back off its knees as quickly as possible. But it does feel like there is a tremendous opportunity here to live differently, and not just in you know, those kind of artisanal ways that you might have practiced in your kitchen in moments of boredom in the last
well, if we just, sorry, I will move on for someone else, but if we go back to where we were before, we'll get the same results again. So we've got this moment in time, and I feel that we need to actually make that shift now, because so much is up in the air. There's going to be so much fragility in our economy. So why don't we design something differently?
Yes. I'm just going to come to Justin Stewart, who's got his hand up. Justin, are you with us?
I'm mute. Does that work?
Yeah, I can definitely hear you.
Jolly good.
There you are. Hello.
I'm sorry. Forgive. I apologise for the cat being stuck around my neck.
Oh, tremendous.
The poor man's Blofeld. One of the issues is that you go back 60 years ago, it was actually the regionalisation you had of finance. You could actually raise money in the regions far more easily. I'm not suggesting you go back to the whole idea that you had in 1945, there were 45 stock exchanges, but in and around Liverpool and Manchester, that area, there were 6. Now, stock exchanges are highly inefficient. There is no shortage of local money in the regions. However, there is no mechanism whereby local people can invest in local businesses.
Exactly.
I'm not talking about widows and orphans. I'm talking about local pension funds, private trusts, wealthy individuals who want to invest locally, but the money ends up going via London. And
it's true to say, isn't it, that you get these extraordinary distortions from massive global pension funds that really subvert the way our communities run. You know, they either cause well-loved smallish businesses to expand at a rate that causes them to fall over, or, you know, they just take money out of regions, don't they?
Well, they do, or they get taken over and they disappear. They get to a certain size and go. Let's go back to Germany. There you'll find, we all know about the Mittelstadt in Germany. Why? Because they've got regional financing, the ability to be able to do that. We used to have that. It wasn't very efficient. It wasn't very good, but it was there. We took that plumbing away. We could put that plumbing back quite easily without a huge amount of cost, without government money, which is the main thing, because the government hasn't got any money, so you're not going to be able to get any. So actually, by actually putting that back, by having regional investment hubs, so people can invest in local businesses they know that need investment post-lockdown to be able to grow and develop and take advantage of the...
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And there's a lot of love for Bruce in the chat. Bruce Davis, now's your chance.
Hi there.
Hey, Bruce.
Yeah, so I run a company called Abundance Investment. We're a crowdfunding company. But the thing we're working on is something called a community municipal investment. And we're working with 5 local authorities, including one local to Vince in Kingston on Thames. And that was developed in conjunction with Leeds University. So the the essay question was, how can ordinary people get back to investing in local infrastructure via a mechanism that is lower risk than what my main business does, which is crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending. So we will be launching the first bond on the 29th or 30th of June in West Berkshire, and then in Warrington in July. And it's exactly on what people are talking about. So from the work we've done, what we've seen is that people want to invest in their local environment. About 70% of people want to do it. Generally, they want that investment to be green or socially positive, and local authorities are keen to diversify where they're getting their funding from. At the moment, the bulk of it comes through the central government Public Works Loan Board, and then secondly, to engage local people in the projects that need or they want to see happen. And the easiest way of doing that is to make a very low minimum investment and allow everyone to invest from £5. So
that's very interesting. So you could have a stake in it at a really low level. Yeah,
we already do £5 bonds into green energy projects, private companies, and all we're doing is taking that model and applying it to local authorities who are used to issue bonds like this back in the 20th century, but through a paper-based system and with a relatively high minimum. With online internet-based systems, we can go a much lower cost. And hopefully the first £1 million bond will be coming out soon to do solar energy. But it gets into this idea of what people, particularly I must say more in the north, because people have a stronger sense of a collective community there, it would appear, it's part of feeling part of the solution. Really, people want to feel empowered about the solutions that are coming through.
I mean, that's very you've definitely taken my optimism meter up a touch, because I think one of the things you worry about. I can see somebody wagging their finger at me, but no, as a card carrying optimist. So the thing that I was concerned about was, I suppose, you come out of this torrid moment and nobody's got any money to invest in anything, and as Ariana was flagging earlier, do institutions and do businesses just topple?
Yeah, well, the institutions can invest in this product as well, but we're very keen, and I think it is a bit of a myth about there's not enough cash, not enough money. There's about 2 trillion of cash in the UK. And we've put 50 billion into our bank accounts in the last 2 months. Now, that's not everybody. I'm not saying everybody, a lot of people struggling to pay rent and so on, but there is a surplus of cash, and the danger is it doesn't get used, that we sit on it. And so the key thing is that we're helping to allocate that, but into institutions that are actually going to move quicker in the recovery than private sector banks. Private sector banks at the moment can't see beyond the stimulus package that the Chancellor is pumping through them. Public sector institutions can start to rebuild certainty again by investing directly into businesses. And what the studies have shown over the last 3 weeks has been about 5 different reports from people like LSE and Oxford and so on. Green stimulus going through the public sector is the most effective short-term and long-term in terms of the impact economically, but also, we also shouldn't ignore the bigger issue that's coming down the road, which is the climate crisis.
I wondered, I don't know whether this is one for you, Steve, or for Ariana, but I wonder whether there would be more successful outcomes in the current crisis on things like delivery of PPE and food supply chains or standards in care homes if more power had already been devolved to regional government. Ariana, go on, you win.
Can you please repeat the last part of the question?
Yes,
because the net connection was a bit weak, sorry. Yeah,
I'm wondering whether, would stronger regional government have led to a better outcome in this moment for supply of PPE, food supply chains, standards in care homes? Is there evidence around the world to suggest that? regional government's done a better job?
Well, I think that there is clear evidence if you look at what is happening in other countries. Germany has been mentioned before. There we have a system of like cooperative. It's not just a federal system. There is also a cooperative. It's based on cooperative principles. Whereas in England, we have a centralized system based on competitive principles. If you give powers to regions and to local authorities, they do know what is needed on the ground. Mm-hmm. They know their community far better than central government in London. And that's why devolution is essential. I'm not saying that they would have solved all the issues, because we are going through a pandemic, and that's a big challenge. But certainly they would be in a better, local leaders would be in a better position to provide the kind of answers that are needed on the ground, tailored around the needs, or specific needs of the local communities they are there to serve.
Yeah, and Steve, just on that, if I can bring you in, if just on that, the care homes point, am I right in thinking that you have it's either you or your near neighbour Manchester that have taken control of inspections in care homes?
Touch on the centralised procurement issue first, because there was a warehouse in our city region stocked with millions of items of PPE that were desperately needed by care homes and elsewhere. And the government insisted that it had to go through a national system, and we lost out massively. Wow. And that will result in unnecessary illnesses, but in deaths as well. I'm absolutely certain of it. Really? In regard to the care homes, I think that's Manchester. But if we can just broaden this out, because the two contributors, Tabitha certainly mentioned about some of the issues we need to overcome, male, pale and stale, tick all three boxes. But conversely, not an awful lot of working class lads from my background have ever made it to the green benches of Parliament. So we need to do a whole host of things to tackle those issues. And that's why we need to smash glass ceilings. That's why I'm working with a group called FASJAB, the Fairness and Social Justice Advisory Board. Today I spoke to 220 young people, the vast majority young girls, and we need to encourage them. But where Tabitha, I think, highlighted about representation, she's right in a way. We need more representation, but it's at the highest level that we haven't got the representation. For some reason, women are very much involved in politics locally, and as soon as it gets to the higher echelons, for whatever reason, they don't smash through. That's the real point that we need, because they're the role models of the future. And just last one, David, just to talk about where we go, because the other one was about economic opportunity. And there are, look, if you're a glass half full person like me, I have to look at what the potential is for the future. And that might be about a sort of a green industrial revolution, stuff around where we need to retrofit homes. I've got a project there that we're developing for the Mersey tidal barrier that will create enough green, clean, predictable energy for 1 million homes. Not pie in the sky, but it needs investment. And that's why it's a shame that we haven't got this national investment bank that we would have had under Labour with a regional investment arm of it. But if not, let's have a look at the other things that we've spoken about, and we can do an awful lot around pension funds. We can do bonds, and also we get some fiscal powers through devolution, but we have to go to a referendum of our businesses if we want to put a precept on the business rate. But there's lots of opportunities as well.
That's very interesting. I'm going to just, if my colleague Tom Goulding is on the call, I'd really like to bring him in, because he's been doing a lot of work on what's going on in Grimsby. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Very well, thank you.
Yeah.
So Tom, we just to backtrack a step. During the election campaign, we spent a lot of time up in Grimsby, and we really got to know areas like East Marsh, which was one of the most deprived areas in the country, and you've been really digging in to talk to people across the city while COVID-19 has been going on. And I mean, Grimsby stands apart in many ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So there are actually a couple of people from Grimsby, I think, on the call, Chris and Zane, maybe Les. So do jump in, guys. Put your hand up if you want to chat about what's been going on locally. But yeah, Grimsby in North East Lincolnshire has pretty much one of the lowest rates in the country. And contact tracing would have been really useful for them at the start of lockdown. When Boris announced lockdown for the country, they only had 3 cases. I spoke to the Director of Public Health there a couple of weeks ago, who said, you know, like all local authorities, they have a public health team that do contact tracing every day for other diseases. Obviously, COVID is a different scale, so they would have needed help. But those teams across the country have been kind of bypassed for the centralised model. But as I think Steve mentioned, Grimsby is, along with about 60% of the North, not in a combined authority. And so obviously the combined authorities don't have many powers because of the centralised nature of our government, but even those outside of combined authority, they have even less. So working out what model would work for them is another question, as well as just evolving meaningful powers.
Yes, indeed. I can see in the chat that Lizzie Insall is doing that rather magnificent thing of being counterintuitive and wants to say that the case for devolution has not been made. I would love to hear you say that, Lizzie, on camera. What's going on?
Hi. Yeah, so I guess I feel that I am a part of so many conversations where we talk about devolution and we talk about the massive benefits of bringing decision making closer to the real lives of people who kind of the receiving end of those decisions. And I think that for many people it's self-evident, but I really feel that when you start to have conversations with central government and with kind of people who are not just holding the power but making decisions about this, that there's a view that the people who are calling for devolution are people who stand to gain from it, and it feels like we're in this tussle between what essentially starts to look like a power tussle rather than a conversation about the clear value that it brings in devolution. And I just feel that at the moment we don't have objective voices, or we don't have an objective conversation about where devolution is a good thing and where it might not be a good thing, and that it's not a blanket single answer to things. And
is your concern partly that there would be losers, for instance? So I mean, like to run with that thing Steve was saying, Liverpool, Manchester, of scale, and you know, can exist on their own terms, but if you're Cumbria, if you're Lancashire, are you going to get left behind? Is that part of your concern?
Well, so part of my concern actually ties in with some of the stuff that Tabitha was saying earlier about the fact that maybe part of the reason that local government isn't equipped to respond to some of the challenges is because of the centralisation that's taken place. And that's to say that we have a highly competitive situation between local areas. They're competing for employers to move in, they're competing for infrastructure projects, they're competing for all sorts of different types of funds from from central government. And so as a result, you end up, there is a risk of a race to the bottom if you start to develop certain issues. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the conditions that we have, the existing conditions, mean that it's not obvious that devolution will necessarily get us to some of the places that we want. What
would your I'm going to put this all on you now. So if not that, then what? How would you make central government more responsive, more in tune, and capable of delivering across the country at a higher level? Levelling up, I think they call it.
Yeah, so I'm not arguing against devolution. I think we do need devolution. And what I guess I'm just trying to say is I don't think the case has been made. And I think it's because there's more nuance to it and an acknowledgement that devolution in some categories and not others. For me, a lot of this, what gets to the heart of this is the very negative and paternalistic relationship between central government and local government, which means that we're not coming from a useful starting point to even have the conversation about devolution.
Yeah, well, these are excellent points. Edna, can I come back to you? I just want to talk about different economic models. We've heard about that the potential for investment for a really sort of entry level by people concerned about green projects locally. I think you have a a concern, don't you, about what might happen when a very able workforce is put to work for a multinational, or a concern that is based outside of a region?
Well, I think the principle is about growth and us looking as divergently as we can as to how our communities and our prosperity grows. And there has been a dependence on large companies investing in communities where there's a wealth extraction model, and actually the profit and the benefit beyond the wage does not sit within that community. And so whilst I do have a lot of sympathy for local authorities inviting large multinationals in because they believe that that provides employment, etc. We have to look longer term beyond that and see how we can create the health benefits of work, see how we can create local economic strategies so that we have got really strong anchor institutions in economies that actually can grow a range of jobs, and that we talk about work in a way that isn't just about the number of people in employment, but we recognise that there can be disbenefits to work dependent on the model as well as real benefits. So it's about understanding what economic growth looks like. And we have got a capitalist profit-making model primarily, and that is not necessarily going to lead to medium-term prosperity for many of our communities. We want people to invest in the long term, in the wider cultural growth of that community, the civic identity of that community, the sense that they are partnering in the growth of the prosperity of that community. So it's probably going back to your previous speaker about having a full debate about what growth looks like, and not using the measures necessarily that we've seen so far, which disadvantage as many people as they do advantage others.
I can see that that Gail Addis is talking about Scotland and suggesting that it is too centralised. We might think of it as some sort of beacon in the north. But Gail, what do you think? What do you have to say?
I empathise very much with what other people are saying about the regions, because it very much applies here. We have an industrialised central belt, which has very different needs and priorities from like the Western Isles, Orkney, Shetland, the Highlands, the Northeast and the Northwest here. And often things are applied from Holyrood, much like you're saying about Westminster, that don't really help us in other areas. For example, the shutdown, many people are saying that the lockdown could be eased in places like the Western Isles where they've had hardly any cases or none at all, Orkney or Shetland where it's been under control. So, and the same goes for investment. I mean, many people mourn the passing of the Highlands and Islands Development Board here, and the regional, when we had Strathclyde Regional Council, in many ways things were a lot better then, rather than when the power was taken over to Holyrood. So it's a similar story here.
So it demonstrably is not the answer to everything. There's still the God. I remember when we were in reporting in Grimsby, and we were at Thinking, and somebody said, "Bloody all gets everything," and it's not like bloody Westminster. It's the place up the road that everyone's concerned about. So perhaps you maybe can't win. Sandy, have we got Sandy Kramer? Is it Kramer or Kremer on the call? Because I'm seeing you using all caps to say big change doesn't happen unless a killer argument emerges. So
yeah, that was me. I'm Tony, not Sandy, but never mind. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You can go on talking, but suddenly big change can happen if an idea emerges that catches the public imagination. They realise that change is necessary, and I think this pandemic has all the properties you'll need to create such a killer moment. And it would seem to me that if it gets much worse, if we have a second and third wave because of some of the bad decisions being made right at the moment, in fact, about lockdown, then people will look back and say, why weren't we able to do something differently in my part of the country where we had this kind of situation? And, you know, why are we subject to some Home Secretary changing rules at Heathrow and the rest of us have to suffer? You know, I think the argument could emerge from this environment, but it isn't there quite at this moment.
So we all sort of agree that there is the instinct, but we're still striving for the killer idea. So apologies that I have not really been looking at people's blue hands, but my colleague Merapi is suggesting Nacho has had his hand up for a while.
Thank you. I wanted to make a few points. The first is, okay, if we have devolution, what is the point of MPs linked to particularly constituencies? At the end of the day, half of the work and the casework of MPs is saying, oh, this is a matter of the council. So I think that here that we have a double layer. Second, there is this myth that has been mentioned that the local government knows better the preferences of the local citizens. The thing is that we live in the 21st century. Google knows better the preferences.
Oh, spare us, Nacho, from Google. We can't put them in charge.
No, but it's true. The thing is that Google knows everything much better of the preferences rather than any council. The thing is that, for instance, if you want to make a change in the traffic, the thing is that if you get GPS data, cell phone data of the movement of the people, you analyze that if you do it at a centralized countrywide effort, you can do it much better. You will get much better input.
I fear that you might have done for my optimism with government by algorithm, though.
Yeah, no, you will get much better data than just depending on the people who can be bothered to respond to a council consultation.
I suppose that is a very fair point. Let me give you one more point, and then I'm going to go to Sally Young if I could had her hand up.
And then there are two points that goes somehow linked. One thing is that there is excessive coziness if you reduce the dimension of the constituency between the administrator and the administered, so that it breeds corruption and clientelism. I think if you depend from a guy who needs money for his re-election in order to open a cafe, the thing is that creates an issue. And finally, it's the money. The thing is that people say, yes, we want devolved powers, but at the end of the day, they want devolved powers, but London sends to the rest of the country 660 million per week more than it receives. So the thing is that, okay, if you want powers, should not you be able to generate the resources to exert those powers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sally, are you still there? I realise you've had your hand up for...
I am still here, yes. Hello from Newcastle, if you haven't
Excellent.
Excellent.
Hello.
It's the issue about local response and somebody involved in the voluntary sector. What I've certainly seen, although absolutely local councils responded much more quickly than central government, local people responded much more quickly than local councils. And local councils can be variable, and indeed so can local communities. But I didn't want the discussion just to be the economy or the people, because I think the better way to get more and better decision making and transparency and accountability is by having greater diversity in that. And there are long discussions we could have about why all the elected mayors are men. but maybe not for this time. Maybe that's another discussion altogether. But I do think it's not an either or, and there has to be some local economy. I mean, you know, Desan have said, unless there's a trade agreement with Europe, they're going to pull out of Sunderland. And we all know how Sunderland voted. So I'll just finish on that point.
I know you can only imagine how the workforce of Nissan voted as well, can't you? But that is definitely one for another day, and I'm not going to take the bait on Sunderland. I can see that we've got about 3 minutes to go. So I tell you what I would love to do is whiz round Vincent, Ariana, and Edna, and Steve, and it's I'm afraid it's the magic one question, or to put it slightly differently, as Tony said, the killer question. Has anyone got a killer idea? Vince, 30 seconds, go on.
Well, you've got to give, if we want strong local government, and most people seem to, they've got to have the capacity to raise money, and they've got to have borrowing powers, and raise local taxation. Means reforming council tax, giving them other sources of income. And the second thing is they need to be genuinely representative. There are too many one-party monopolies. Scotland, despite the problems that were pointed out a few minutes ago, has genuinely representative local government, proportionally representative, lots of collaboration and consensus. That works much better than the English model.
Yes, I think, yeah, you get us into another one of our pet subjects. The whole reform of the constitution and the need for a written constitution and proportional representation and so on, but another day, surely. All right, Ariana, your 30 seconds.
Well, I think that the discussion that we had today really shows that the problem is in the nature of central-local relations. And we keep talking about what works and what doesn't work at the local level. Maybe it's time that we think about how we need to reform the center rather than the local level. Because unless we start reforming the center, nothing is going to change on the ground. And I think that's the way forward to really make sure that the recovery can lead to renewal and we see a proper system of devolution in place.
I really like that as an outcome. And Steve, where are you?
Very quickly, we're not going to change anything in this country unless we can change the way the Treasury implements Green Book guides and formula. So we need a different type of funding methodology, which includes things like social deprivation. That's the only way you'll rebalance the economy. It's the only way you'll level up. It's the only way you get some fairness into a palpably unfair political system.
Like it. And go on, Edna, you have the final word.
I think it's about taking some of the identity out of current politics. So I think it's about the party political system and trying to create a new civic conversation about representation. So I think that the party politics and the combative nature of that has become really quite destructive at times. So for me, it's about a conversation about how we have civic representation.
Yes, I suppose that's a very nice point to end on, I think, because one of the things that it strikes me we're living through at the moment is that whilst we've all been isolated from one another, it does rather feel like we've come closer together. In our communities, we've had, in a way that we've all perhaps just overlooked in the past. We can see the people whose jobs are keeping us going. They're getting us to work. They're delivering our many parcels and all of those things that you just think, God, we've been placing value in all the wrong places. We've been admiring the wrong people, and there's got to be something that we can take from all of those rounds of applause. So I feel there is a civic engagement which is broadly based and doesn't just happen in conversations like this, and that's a power in the land at the moment, and we can try and harness that. I really like the idea of the consequence of restoring more power in Westminster as the next act being to take that away and reform it. I think however we do that, there would be broadly based support for it. It seems to me very persuasive that you know, you have a city like Liverpool with a neighbour like Manchester that have, you know, tremendous workforces and they're brimming with ideas and ingenuity. They should be able to build something for themselves, and they shouldn't be seeking permission from people who perhaps don't really care that much. You know, they might care about bottom line in the economy, but they don't care that much about you know, what goes on in cities like that, it seems to me. I defer to James, our editor at Tortoise, when he wrote something which he shared with me, and he was saying, you know, when the history of the 21st century is written, 2020 is going to be the year, and you know, we're going to look at it and say, was that the year the century started, or did we drift back instead of choosing to build something better? I feel that we're on the cusp of building something better. It's possible that we might all go and get on with our lives again. But I'm really grateful for the very nuanced conversation that we've had. I think we did see a story come into our newsroom with that terrible line about the warehouse in Liverpool, and I'd like to know more about that. But I think, you know, I'm really confident that we will do some meaningful work that will get us far outside of the M25, even if most of us can't leave our back bedrooms to do our journalism. So thank you everyone for taking part. It's been really uplifting. We're going to do another one this time next week, and we're going to be looking at that stuff about communities and neighbourhoods, and how do you capitalize on that? You know, how do you build communities that last? I think this is one. So let's end on that. Let's end in the traditional digital thinking way of giving everyone a wave. I really appreciate you taking part, and I hope you have a brilliant night, and we'll speak again soon. All right. Cheers, guys.